patch 9.1 is going to be available in just a few days. In fact, Wowhead even has a confirmation there is a patch number for it, so this thing is definitely coming out in a bit. I'm so excited to get in and check some of the stuff out, and it's going to be a couple of weeks before Blizzard really puts stuff out in terms of class changes, updates, Torghast, mod, dungeons, raids. All that stuff is going to be tested thoroughly. But before we get into 9.1, I did put a list together of some of the things that I want to see for rogues when it comes to patch 9.1. Rogues in Shadowlands are generally in a good spot, but there are a couple things that I'm going to be talking about, like the PvP side of things, the PvE side of things, like Mythic Pluses and Raids, as well as the Covenants, in terms of kind of how I want to break down in this video some of my wish lists that I would want to see for rogues. I'm not saying that any of these things are going to come out, and we'll definitely test the class thoroughly, but these are some of the things me as a rogue main, what I would want to see out of my class in the next patch. Before we really dive into it, one of the things that we know about patch 9.1, unless Blizzard changes their mind, there's not going to be tier set off the bat. I thoroughly believe that tier sets can solve a lot of the issues that class or spec may have, because you can augment that class playstyle, or maybe even give them a different damage profile, or even just let players play talents you normally would never run instead of a raid setting, because with the tier set now that talent is actually really good and you have a build that's all around that talent and tier set, and it could be quite fun and diverse in terms of
you could say that about legendaries too.
But this video is going to be done with the idea that we're not getting tier sets, but if Blizzard does change their minds, it can open up a lot of opportunities for rogues. First, let's talk about rogues in PvE. I would say we're mostly solid, definitely very dominant when it comes to Mythic Pluses. Shroud is super good, so unless we get
but you don't get invites if you're pug,
that stops
because you don't have lust in your melee.
Going to be a great PvE spec. We have good damage, but we don't really bring any group or raid utility. By raid utility, I mean, like, mages with the intellect buff, warriors with the shout, monks with mystic touch. Rogues don't bring anything to the table, so it's really difficult and puts rogues in a bad spot when it comes to finding groups, because you either have to be top DPS in single target and AoE, or no one is going to bring you, when they can bring a Death Knight who can do damage similarly to you, but also they bring anti-magic zone. I feel like if Rogue got some kind of a buff to bring to the group, or maybe like a debuff to put on enemies similar to Mystic Touch, maybe something along the lines of when you poison an enemy, they are more likely to get crit by abilities by 2%. Like a small buff where if you do bring a rogue, you have some sort of a benefit to raid. But if you don't bring a rogue, it's not the end of the world, and you don't necessarily need a rogue to raid. Some kind of a buff that's in the middle, I would be happy with. But if they did end up giving us some kind of a unique mandatory buff to bring to raids, then definitely would be much easier for rogues to get in a variety of different groups. When it comes to outlaws for PvE, I would say we're in a great spot. Definitely a lot of big AoE damage in that spec. Overall, a monster in Mythic Pluses. We do have some dead talents and some talents where I would love to run Dread Blades, I would love to try loaded dice, but Alacrity is just way too good, and it's just the only viable choice in the rogue. So maybe we could start with talent baseline, or moving them around to be more competitive would be nice. Another thing I would love for Outrogue is a brand new mastery. Our mastery just doesn't scale that well, and it's just not all that good. So giving us a brand new mastery, a stat that would actually be beneficial for us, would be really nice. Assassination rogues have rose to prominent power recently, and they're doing really well. Great at boss damage, and single target is just fantastic. One of the things I would love to see for Assassination is more of that, and hopefully they'll scale good with gear, but I also would love to see a dot focus playstyle with the talents. Maybe even change up some of the talents, remove some of the ones that are just, not that strong, and change them up with talents that are all about damage over time abilities. More focus on the poison over time and bleed over time damage, I think would be superb, and would give us a very interesting profile to bring in PvE content. Subtlety rogues are in a weird spot because their playstyle feels fantastic, but they're not as strong as single target as Assass, and they're not as good at AoE as Outlaw, so it puts them in kind of a rough spot right now. I think they definitely need some sort of unique DPS gameplay. In the previous expansion of Battle for Azeroth, for a short time they had this funnel style playstyle where they would use Shuriken Storm to generate comp points, but instead of using AoE finishers to do damage, they would use single target eviscerate damage. And in fact, you actually get a buff. For every person hit with Shuriken Storm, your eviscerate did more damage to a single target. This allowed him to use the fodder around a trash bag and really focus in on the strongest, deadliest mob in that dungeon. It was a strong playstyle, but it felt kind of toxic, because if you're doing Mythic Pluses with a playstyle basically was just don't AoE the mobs, let them stay alive, so then the sub rogue can just funnel that single target damage into one mob. This is different than like playing with a fire mage
like
and playing around with combustion. Where, let's say fire mage says, okay, I have combustion, go big. Playing around a fire mage means a risky play, but big reward if you're able to pull it off. Pull big and let the mage burn everything to the ground. If the mage can do so, then you'll win. But also, it doesn't stop any of the other classes from doing their damage. You don't just stop DPS, let the fire mage do it by himself. Everybody can join the
fire mages are getting nerfed.
You basically have to stop your DPS so then the sub-rogue can do more single target damage as the need they ask to be alive for as long as possible. So then you have to just not hit them at all and the sub-rogue can do more damage. And it feels a bit of degen playstyle, and there's a reason why I removed it. It was something strong that Subtlety could do, but without having like
single target.
A specific DPS profile,
once your shadow dance
against the other specs.
Shadow dance
player versus player content, rogues are monsters. We're squishy, but are very hard hitting with a lot of mobility and a lot of crowd control. Really, as a rogue in PvP, there isn't really much you can complain about. We do have some degen playstyles where we just go for the big one-shots.
Rogues and hunters,
more than
I think,
one
are having
involved,
the most
which
fun
I guess
right
is just
now.
the name of the game. As players are exploring
Maybe
more
not.
legendaries,
Paladin
it's a situation where every few weeks people are finding even more broken things about rogues. So we're just extremely strong in PvP. They are going to be doing changes to honor talents, which could reduce some of the degen gameplay that we've been seeing sometimes, and hopefully it'll be better for the most part. Get some honor talents that nobody ever plays thrown out and enhance the ones that people play all the time, and maybe even change some things up. Give us brand new honor talents to allow us different PvP profiles that we usually never get to play with. Finally, we have Covenants, and for Covenants, rogues probably have some of the closest Covenant abilities and Covenant choices.
I almost want to go Necro,
Our Covenants are so close together that in the last sims that I looked at the Rogue Discord, we were, as rogues, generally anywhere between 70 to 200 DPS difference on all the Covenants. When it comes to single target, as well as AoE, all the specs, all 4 Covenants. That means that we're actually pretty close in comparison to some of the other classes who have swings of like 1,000 damage difference.
Because I don't use
200,
Door
which is a really good number.
I would
there are
use
definitely metas.
the,
A certain
Fleshcraft.
Covenant combinations are slightly stronger than others, but if you want to play someone off meta, this will be the class where you will have the least amount of punishment.
Foam Spike
so
does
I can't
more
complain, but
burst
we
than
can
flatulation.
I would say, if anything, the Kirin combo point mechanic, most players ignore that mechanic completely. It's still a strong ability, and Kirin is still a very popular choice for rogues, but the fact that rogues ignore that whole combo point mechanic of that ability and just play the rotation like it doesn't exist, I don't think Blizzard designed that ability with a mechanic that is supposed to be ignored, so maybe that could get a bit of a rework. Generally, our soulbinds are pretty good, but they are going to be buffing them. And one thing I noticed with most Covenants is there's generally one good soulbind for specific situations. It would be nicer if they were more broad, there were more choices, because in most cases, except for one of the Covenants, there's really just one good soulbind for everything. We also have a lot of bad potency conduits that are just not that great, and you really don't know one. You have like 1 or 2 really solid choices, and the others are just not that competitive. I would say a lot of the outward stuff is just RNG, so it would be nice if there were less RNG based and more guarantee based. Then you have the other specs of Sub and Assass that could potentially be good, but they're just not that strong at the moment, and it'll be nicer for them to be far stronger so you could craft real builds around them. Anything to make the conduits a bit more impactful. But besides all that, rogues are in a pretty good spot in Shadowlands right now, and I'm still looking forward to all the changes that classes like rogues are going to be getting in patch 9.1. I am hoping that rogues do get some meaningful changes, even though we are generally in a really good spot. I'm still hoping that we get some really cool updates overall. But that's going to be my video on my wish list, and what I want to see for rogues in the future. It's not a big wish list, as Blizzard did do a lot of good stuff with patch 9.5, but I still feel like there could be more work done, particularly in the raid environment. But I'm going to finish up the video here. Thank you guys so much for checking it out. Let me know your thoughts. What would you want to see for rogues in patch 9.1 in the comments below. Thank you guys so much for watching. I do hope you guys enjoyed, and as always, I'll see all of you guys in another video.
Okay, see you next time.